Let's pray. Father, thank you so much for today. Pray that you will bless our time together. Pray that you will give me the right words to say today as we discuss some pretty serious and heavy issues that I think are clearly related to Bible prophecy and the scriptures that you have graciously given to us to indicate to us the things that will be coming upon the earth before you return for your church and to set up your kingdom. Just pray that you'll always keep us mindful of that great hope that we have in you. And for those of our beloved ones who have passed on, that they will be resurrected to share that time with us. In Jesus' name, amen. Well, today I'm going to talk a little bit about never let a crisis go to waste. I also thought about titling it Difficult Choices, Impossible Choices, No-Win Choices, because as I sort of listen and look and watch at things as they're unfolding, I do not think that the convergence of things that have happened in the last 2 months in the world, all over the world, are not necessarily related to specific things in Bible prophecy, but they indicate some things are coming and things can change very quickly. I was mentioning to someone the other day that, that a few months ago we were talking about something and said, boy, it'd be great to go back to 2016 because that was a pretty good year. And now I'm thinking it would be pretty great to go back to the end of December of 2019 because things were pretty good then, although things were starting to change, but they've escalated quite dramatically, and we are really in a disrupted world. It's interesting that we're in a world where there are war drums beating, but wars are pretty much shut down. But the world is more disrupted than ever, and people in government and public health are facing daily what I would consider to be almost impossible choices as to what they need to do to deal with the situation in front of them. So I will say up front, I don't intend to offend anybody today. But I have to, when I have clients come to me as a lawyer, I tell them what I think is how a certain legal situation is going to unfold. And sometimes that news is very bad and heavy. I can tell that people are stressed. I'll confess to you, I'm stressed. The world has changed. Now, I can probably say that, my life, in some respects, is better. I'm getting to spend more time with my wife. And it's great for her. She's getting to spend time with me, too. I mean, imagine that blessing. That's not canned laughter, by the way. That's not piped in. But, I look around, I have friends that are sick, that are ill, that have lost parents or friends to this virus. I know that lives are tremendously disrupted. People have lost jobs by the truckload. And so, if I look beyond my own little circle at my house, I see a lot of suffering. And I see a world that is disrupted, and I see a world that I do not believe will ever be the same. Last week, and I can kind of tell the stress because of the type of comments that we get on our YouTube channel. And it's always interesting because people will say something like, I will talk about a certain passage or something like that, and somebody will say, well, you should have said this You didn't say this. And I'm like, you do understand that I have a certain time frame that I'm trying to keep in because we have people that help put these videos up. And I do actually, okay, we can stop with the peanut gallery over there. Yes, I do try to keep within a time frame. It may not be your time frame, but I have the mic. But for example, last week there was so I don't discuss everything that could come out of a passage, and maybe the better comment would be, you're talking about that passage maybe brings to mind something else that I found in the passage, rather than pointing out, maybe what you think is my deficiency and not somehow knowing things as much as you do. I guess that's what I'm trying to say is, I think people need to be much kinder, but I also think you need to speak really hard truth. One comment last week on our YouTube channel, since deleted, was, you're a shepherd, you're a pastor, you are to calm your flock down, and you failed miserably last week. And that could probably be said any week, because the things that I talk about, when Jesus talked about the end times, he talked about, things coming upon the earth where men's hearts would fail them for fear. He said that this thing would come with perplexity. That's not this new smooth paved highway. It's going to be a bumpy road that you're going to go down at 100 miles an hour. And it's going to be very disconcerting. So it's funny because Steve and I don't talk about what either one is going to talk about. But as I was preparing this morning, I heard his message. I highly recommend that you listen to Steve Mitchell's message. And he's been doing some Tuesday night Bible studies that we live stream, and they're up on our YouTube channel. So one of the verses I had selected this morning was this. 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 58. And Steve, is one of the passages that you ended with. So maybe the Lord wanted that to happen. Therefore, my beloved brethren, be ye steadfast, unmovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord, for as much as ye know that your labor is not in vain in the Lord. Now, I don't remember exactly what Steve said about that passage, but I know a lot of people are nervous about work and jobs. But always remember that as Christians, as believers in Jesus Christ, and those who have been saved by the gospel of Jesus Christ, is that our earthly work is important, but even without that, we have the work of the Lord to do. And the promise is to be steadfast and unmovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord. Now, part of what we think is our responsibility here at FBC is found in a number of passages. I could read it out of Ezekiel chapter 3, but I've put in Ezekiel chapter 33. Again, the word of the Lord came unto me, saying, Son of man, speak to the children of thy people, and say unto them, when I bring us the sword upon a land, if the people of the land take a man of their coast and set him for their watchman, if when he seeth the sword come upon the land, he blow the trumpet and warn the people, then whosoever heareth the sound of the trumpet and taketh not warning, if the sword come and take him away, his blood shall be upon his own head. He heard the sound of the trumpet and took not warning, his blood shall be upon him. But he that taketh warning shall deliver his soul. But if the watchman see the sword come and blow not the trumpet, and the people be not warned, if the sword come and take any person from among them, he is taken away in his iniquity, but his blood will I require at the watchman's hand. So thou, O son of man, I have set thee a watchman unto the house of Israel. Therefore thou shalt hear the word at my mouth, and warn them from me. When I say unto the wicked, O wicked man, thou shalt surely die, If thou dost not speak to warn the wicked from his way, that wicked man shall die in his iniquity, but his blood will I require at thine hand. Nevertheless, if thou warn the wicked of his way to turn from it, if he do not turn from his way, he shall die in his iniquity, but thou hast delivered thy soul. Therefore, O thou son of man, speak unto the house of Israel, thus ye speak, saying, if our transgressions and our sins be upon us, and we pine away in them, how should we then live? Say unto them, as I live, saith the Lord, I have no pleasure in the death of the wicked, but that the wicked turn from his way and live. Turn ye from your evil ways, for why will you die, O house of Israel? Therefore, thou son of man, say unto the children of thy people, the righteousness of the righteous shall not deliver him in the day of his transgression. As for the wickedness of the wicked, he shall not fall thereby in the day that he turneth from his wickedness. Neither shall the righteous be able to live for his righteousness in the day that he sinneth. When I shall say to the righteous that he shall surely live, if he trust to his own righteousness and commit iniquity, all his righteousnesses shall not be remembered. But for his iniquity that he hath committed, he shall die for it. So we live in a incredibly difficult time. I'm going to make a little bit of a request that you think twice before sending me videos of all the different theories about what's going on, what caused this virus, whether it's real, whether it's not real, what's fake, what's not fake. I have eyes and I watch a lot of information, but I would estimate that in the past week, since I did a midweek update, I know that I've been sent over 500 videos to watch, in addition to many messages. So this is a very difficult time. It is a very difficult time to figure out what is going on. And so I understand the sentiment of the person that said, I failed to calm the flock down last week. So I will tell you up front, I doubt that I will calm you down this week. If I might, actually there's some things here that I think are troubling and encouraging at the same time that I will share at the end. Part of the problem is social media. And everybody wants to blame the media. The media is misleading us. Let me tell you, folks, I don't watch a lot of media on TV. I watch some videos. I read a lot of newspapers from all different kinds of political and cultural perspectives. So I have a pretty good broad-based thing. So when I prepare one of these things, I know it may not look like it, but I will usually spend somewhere around 30 hours to prepare for this hour talk during the course of an average week, sometimes more. Because one of the things, I am a lawyer, and someone will say, well, then lawyers, they don't really care about the truth, but I do. And so everybody wants to blame, for example, everybody wants to blame the media. And believe me, there's a lot to pick apart in the media right now. But let me tell you, everybody on social media, there's a lot to pick apart about you too, and the stuff you're sending around, and the comments that I see from people who claim to be followers of Jesus Christ and essentially wishing for the death of certain people. The passage that I read in Ezekiel chapter 33 says that the Lord takes no pleasure in the death of the wicked, and neither should you. And it is quite disturbing to watch that. But what's happened with social media, I have a little thing from Al Jazeera. Now listen, I will play a clip from non-Christian people. I will play clips from Al Jazeera, an Arab news organization, but it's to prove a point. I don't endorse everything that, say, Caroline Glick has ever said. Even I will point out some things that I think she has that are intelligent, that make me think, and that are indicative of intelligent, wise people that have some light. So don't ever accuse me or anybody else who does this of, well, because you played that clip, you must endorse everything they say. That's not the case. Even if I play a clip of another pastor, that doesn't mean I've endorsed everything that he says. But I found this clip on Al Jazeera, and I thought that it was very poignant about what we see going on in social media, because everybody on social media blames the media without realizing that they've become the media also. Listen to what this clip says. I think it's very insightful. We'll start off with some statements from the Secretary General of the UN, and I have a longer clip from him later, but he was talking about the world global response to this crisis regarding the virus.
Our common enemy is a virus, but our enemy is also a growing surge of misinformation. So to overcome this virus, we need to urgently promote facts and science, and we also need to promote hope and solidarity over despair and division.
The UN Secretary General has called out misinformation surrounding coronavirus as a global threat, and I absolutely agree. When any government makes a bold proclamation about the origin of the virus or who's really to blame, they should be required to back up their allegations, and those allegations should be judged, not just by a friendly media, but by people who will be necessarily critical. We're at a point of extreme danger regarding misinformation and rising international tensions amid a global pandemic.
This is more a case study of how the modern information environment works. But generally speaking, it's not been created by Moscow, it's not been created by China, it's been created by humanity as a whole. There are now no more gatekeepers, there are no more people who can control it. Anyone who has a blog, a Twitter feed, an Instagram feed, is a media outlet in their own right. What this means is all kinds of eye-catching nonsense emerges. The issue is how, in a way, this is curated and controlled.
And I think that's a very insightful comment. And so while we're quick to blame the media, we also need to understand that by posting things on social media, that we have also become part of the media and have a responsibility to vet the things that we send out. I will give you an example. There's a theory out there called QAnon, and that there's 150,000 sealed indictments, and Trump is just using the virus outbreak as a cover to take down the deep state. It's much more complicated than that. And I've addressed the issue many times over the last 2.5 years that when there were 3,000 sealed indictments, I said the data was flawed. There are not. I know how indictments come about. I'm a lawyer. I've handled white-collar criminal cases. And when it was 3,000, I said the number's inflated. Then it went to 8. I said it's crazy. And now they're saying 142,000. And I told people if there's 15 or 20 people that actually get indicted, I will be glad if they're properly done indictments. So there are all these theories. So somebody sent me numerous videos in one, so I decided, well, I'm going to watch one. And she was talking about how we have done this. We are taking down the deep state. We are rescuing the children. And I didn't understand her we thing because she's sitting in her dining room doing the video. And so whether she's right or wrong on the part, but about midway through the video, she started talking about things. Jesus has already come, and we are light bearers with this alien force that is circling the planet. And I wrote to the person and I said, this lady's crazy. Yeah, but the first part of what she said was good. I said, how do you know that? Show me the proof. And then, eventually these conversations end in, somebody blocking someone and being unfriended. But the point is that, and I understand people are stressed out. They want to know what's going on. And 2 months ago, the world was humming along pretty well. And now, boom, everything has changed. But I think there's a responsibility on people to vet the information that you're sending out. Click on the links rather than just saying, well, so-and-so said this. Why don't you check and see whether so-and-so actually said true? Use Google. Just type the information into Google. If you have a news article that says something or a screenshot of it, type it in. It'll take you like 2 seconds to be to the source article, and then read the article and see if what that person who's posted in his Twitter feed is actually true. And a lot of times you'll find out it's absolute nonsense. And what happens is this cycle perpetuates itself, and 80 forwards down the line, people just assume, well, look at all the people who forwarded this. It must be true. I don't have to vet it. I think we all have a responsibility. So how I'm going to sort of organize this today, I'm going to talk theoretically, my outline is to talk about the economy and the virus and the impact. And then in the context of never letting a crisis go to waste, what I think people will do about this, because I do think we know as students of Bible prophecy that there is coming some sort of world order that will be under the control of the Antichrist. I don't believe that system comes into place overnight. It will come into place very quickly and suddenly. In fact, in the scriptures, it says when they say peace and safety, then sudden destruction comes. That's one example. That things seem to be great, and then all of a sudden they're not. And I would suggest to you that in our world, we have a perfect example of that. That 2 months ago, 3 months ago, it seems like ancient history now, economy was humming along, record employment, growth, stock market at the all-time record highs, everybody was happy. And then it changed. And then it really changed. But just here's some examples. And I did a little midweek update on Wednesday. You can look at this. So I'll cite just some of the stuff I saw. Now, I love Cheesecake Factory. Although, not to look at me, you would not believe that I've only had like one piece of Cheesecake Factory cheesecake in like 12 years. But that's true. And I forgive them for taking Vietnamese summer rolls off the menu, even though I think that was a major marketing error. But this is a 10K report that Cheesecake Factory, and the Cheesecake Factory is one of the most successful restaurant chains in history. The numbers that come out of a Cheesecake Factory, especially a successful one, I know one here locally, had a friend who was an assistant manager, and said that on a regular weekend, this one location would sell 10,000 pieces, a very overpriced cheesecake, I might add, 10,000 pieces of cheesecake in a weekend. That generates a lot of revenue. What do they sell them for? $6.95, $7.95, $8.95. That's a lot of money for a restaurant in a week in most restaurants, let alone just from pieces of cheesecake. And so, but now here's this 10K they put out last week. They've laid off all 41,000. They've laid off 41,000 hourly employees, restaurant staff members. And it says here, given the impact of governmental regulations and landlord decisions to close properties, considering the nature of our rent obligations and as part of an ongoing efforts to manage our financial position and preserve financial flexibility, we are not planning to pay rent on our leases for the month of April 2020 at this time. We're in various stages of discussions with our landlords. Now, listen, this is happening at every level of business in the world. And the cascading effect of this is the Cheesecake Factory has a lease in a development, a mall or whatever. They don't pay their rent. The developer who has mortgaged the property with the bank can't make his mortgage payments. And then the bank has to decide what are they going to do with the property. Do we foreclose on it? And then the landlord says, well, do I evict this person? Well, here in Ohio, the courts have all been issuing, there's dozens and dozens of orders in my email. We're not doing this, we're only having this, and everyone's a little bit different. But the pretty unified response has been, in terms of evictions, we're not doing anything for 90 days. Well, that's going to have an impact. So what about the banks? Well, we'll foreclose on the property. Oh, we're not doing foreclosures for 90 days. Even the ones that are in process, everything is shut down. So this has a cascading financial impact through many different layers. There are local developments that are pretty new and elsewhere across the state that developers have put up $500 million into expanding office space, apartments, condos, restaurants, entertainment, health clubs. It's all shut down. And the people who are renting apartments and stuff, maybe they'll stop paying their lease payments for a few months because they've lost their jobs. So this has a cascading effect. I have said that, I don't know exactly what's going to happen in the economy. I think we could all go back to work today, and we have years of workout problems. People go to their insurance companies and they say, hey, we have business interruption insurance. But in most insurance policies, it says you only can recover if there's property damage. So is the threat that there might be a virus on your property, is that actual property damage? And I can hear one of our insurance people saying in the background, no, it's not. Is an order, a government order? They also will have exclusions that they actually exclude pandemics, virus. They will also say that if you're pursuant to an order or decree or a statute, you're shut down. You might have coverage for business interruption, or you don't have coverage for business interruption insurance. So then the question is, well, is an executive order from the governor or the health department to shut down, is that a covered event? So there's going to be, trust me, there's going to be years and years of litigation. And you've all seen the ads on TV. Were you exposed to asbestos, you might be entitled to compensation. And I would suspect in 10 years, we're going to see, during the 2020 pandemic, were you exposed to hand sanitizer, you might be entitled to compensation. I'm just sure there'll be enterprising lawyers out there to try to make a buck. So the economic thing is just absolutely crushing out. Also displays itself in oil. Oil price went down below $20 a barrel. It did come back up about 50% during the week, but there was supposed to be a big meeting with all the oil producers, OPEC and the other big producers today or yesterday. It got canceled. It's postponed till at least midweek. And oil analysts that I've seen expect oil to crater on Monday, because people are pumping and there's no place to store it. It costs a lot of money to shut down wells. And again, it's just this cycle. One of the largest shale oil producers, mainly in the Bakken fields and up into North Dakota, has filed for bankruptcy, and they're all cutting across the board billions of dollars of expenditures, capital expenditures and operating expenses. And I'm told that virtually most wells are shut down or will be shut down. But it's expensive to do that. Here's from the Wall Street Journal. The oil glut is getting critical. Plunging oil price could go negative. And I said this to a friend who's a financial analyst, and he goes, how is that even possible that oil price could go negative? And the article explained it. This is from the Times of London, and it says, look, it costs so much money to shut down a well that they calculate that if they continue to pump and pay somebody to take the oil away, it's cheaper than shutting down the well for a time. But now that they've shut down the well, if the economy picks back up, the well's not going to come back online immediately. And so oil prices that might be $30 a barrel now, and a lot of people think it go down to $7 or $8 a barrel in the near term, unless the oil producers get a handle on it, it will skyrocket. And we may see $100, $150, $200 barrel in oil. But no, the problem is there are very few prophets in the world, and I mean PROPHETS, and right now there are very few profits, PROFITS, as a matter of fact. So here's an article from oilprice.com. This is from the article, it could go negative. So it explains to you why that could do. Given the cost of shutting down a well, a producer would be willing to pay someone to dispose of a barrel, analyst at Goldman Sachs says. And Goldman Sachs knows, whether you agree with their political philosophy or not, they actually know what they're talking about. They make a lot of money. Millions of barrels per day of production is likely to be shut, raising the prospect that when the crisis passes, there will be an inflationary oil supply shock of historic proportions. And as I look through the financial press this week, that's what I saw over and over again. The words that we use a lot is we talk about things fitting within the Bible prophecy framework. Unprecedented, convergence, historic proportions, shock. I mean, all these things, and you see them more and more today. So here's an article, how low could U.S. oil production actually go? Because, one of the things that was touted was, well, look how independent we are. We have tons of oil. We're oil independent. And now the oil's shut down. Now, it's okay in some respects. We've been buying to supply our strategic reserves, and if price goes up, they'll be able to be sold at for a lot of money. But if all the shale oil companies go bankrupt in the meantime, how are you going to start that back up to become oil independent again? It's a very, very complex issue. Again, when I look at the world, I see a increasing, at one point I would say it was like the Appalachian Mountains of problems. Now we're at the Rockies and soon to be at the Himalayas in terms of increasing problems and irresolvable things. Here's an example of oil rigs shut down worldwide. You can see there's been a pretty dramatic drop just from February to April. Because people aren't working, things are shut down. People aren't driving. There are some wonderful things about social media. I love memes that are clever. And one of the memes I saw this week, did anybody notice that you're suddenly getting 3 weeks to the tank now on your gas? Instead of 50 miles to the gallon, you're getting 3 weeks to the tank. Because nobody's going anywhere. It's a pretty amazing thing. Here's an article also from the Wall Street Journal, extra Saudi oil to nowhere. They're pumping oil. In fact, the other day, I don't think I have the headline, they are actually, one day last week, Saudi Arabia pumped more oil that day than any day in its history. And who are they going to sell it to? And now all the oil tankers are full. The storage places are filling up. The refineries aren't really refining that much because the gas demand has gone down. So they don't want the oil. And to me, it does seem to be an irresolvable problem. Here's an article from Financial Times. Oil price soars 50% after Trump tweet spurs hope for Saudi-Russia supply cut. So Trump tweets and the oil price goes up 50%. Now, it went up 50%. That was an all-time record increase. But it went up 50% because it had gone down so far. So, if it's at $20 a barrel and 50%, it goes up to 30, which is still way below where anybody can make, except for a few people, can make money on it. Here's some other things. As I mentioned earlier, lenders face losses in the billions as loans go bad. 1 in 5 small firms may be forced to shut for good. I talked to, since business has slowed down quite a bit, it's slowed down for me, so I talked to people. And I said to a friend of mine, I said, I think unemployment in the U.S. and most places in the world will hit at least 30% in the near term. To which my friend said, wow, you're optimistic. Because it could be worse than that. Here again, this is a headline from Times of London. Global economy will never fully recover. These are rational, smart, financial people. They're looking at the situation, and these are not some crazy, stupid newspapers. We have a major economic crisis in the world. Here's another example. U.S. retail sector teeters on edge after closures. Macy's laid off 130,000 people the other day. Article in the Wall Street Journal, Americans struggle with bills. We have a really, really serious crisis economically. Now, my view is that had the virus been contained to China, I think that we would pretty much be at this place anyway, because China shut down. And when China shut down, that unleashed an economic contagion or virus, if you will, that was going to be very, very difficult. For example, here's just some examples. Supply crunch, leading German ventilator maker warns of global demand that it cannot fill. And I know a lot of people think that everything's overstated about this crisis and the death rate isn't that high. And, my own view is that I do think it's a problem. I don't know that the death rate is necessarily what I look at. I look at the impact on healthcare systems and the overwhelming of ICU units. Hospitals are and this is an example, hospitals are pretty much shut down, except for the ICU units. And so they're overwhelming the ICU units. So it doesn't look like anything's going on at the hospital, but there's plenty of going on inside. You can find hundreds of videos of doctors and nurses who are really, I think you need to pray for them because they're staying away from their families. They're working 16, 20 hours a day in suits that are very uncomfortable. I have a video later here. I want to show you what happened in China with healthcare workers. And just to see, here's a picture of a harbor in Bangladesh where tourists go on cruises and stuff to take little boat rides. Nothing's happening. I was kind of shocked to find that there's a number of cruise ships at sea that people, even after this crisis started to break out, were taking cruises. I'm not sure I understand I don't think I understand the thinking there. I don't think I see any thinking there. There's still a lot of planes in the air, and but I see pictures from flight attendant friends where they have 6 people on a 170-seat 737. And the question is, what are we going to do? How do we handle it? It's all kind of related. So here's an article from the Times of London from Monday. It says Britain faces 6 months of curbs. And everybody's like, the economy can't sustain it. The economy will shut down. It'll be awful. And I understand that. Here's another thing. Doctor dies after picking up infection from patient. And here, Queen calls on nation to be strong as virus strikes medics. A picture below of the, what's the modern terminology? Partner of Boris Johnson, who's pregnant. He's sick at 10 Downing Street with a fever. She's pregnant, expecting their child, and now she has the virus as well. So it is a very difficult situation in which we find ourselves. In fact, this is from this morning's Times of London. Inside number 10, everyone is at war. So even where people are not using social media, they're fighting with each other about how do we handle this crisis. The health people have this view, the economic people have this view, and it seems to be a very thing. We learn more and more about this virus. Most people, almost every article I said, 80% of people recover with mild symptoms at most. But it's the 20% or so who get sick and maybe need to end up on ventilators that are the problem. And people bounce back and forth. And so it becomes very difficult for the public to understand, what is our policy? So Britain, the UK started with the policy of, we're going to develop herd immunity. We'll just let it run wild, and eventually enough people will get immunity, and we'll deal with the deaths of people that happen. And then they saw some reports, and they said, no, we need to go into lockdown. Then they're saying lockdown needs to go 6 months. And then yesterday come out with this article, Prime Minister's virus advisor calls for way out of lockdown. Because here's what the article says. Britain has painted itself into a corner with no clear exit strategy from the coronavirus epidemic and needs to reconsider herd immunity, according to a senior government advisor. And the same conflicts are going on within the United States government and at state governments and state capitals all across the United States, and capitals and governments everywhere. The article continues, a prolonged lockdown risks causing more suffering than the virus itself. Graham Medley, the government's chief pandemic modeler, has warned. He said that the country needed to face the trade-off between harming the young versus the old. Now, that's a very kind way of saying, do you understand the calculus that's made there? You're old, and I've seen people say that, you're going to die anyway. Okay, then let's stop all health care. Is that what you really want? That's the logical extension of what you're saying. And so what I see is a lot of people look, these are hard issues, and we're all having trouble wrestling with them, and I can assure you that people in government are having equally difficult issues. This is from the Wall Street Journal yesterday. The left, virus death spike in New York. The middle, preparing for the next pandemic, which was actually written by someone who's with the Gates Foundation, because they're very much involved in vaccines and that sort of thing. And then this thing from their one section, the month that changed everything. And so again, I'm not saying that this is exactly the fulfillment of Bible prophecy, but I think these things that we're seeing are harbingers of how Bible prophecy will unfold. It will be very rapid, and you may see headlines, and the world may see headlines in the future that say, instead of this, the month that changed everything, it will be the month that really changed everything. And the impact that they have. Restaurants closed, stores closed, malls closed, health clubs. Here's an example of how the progression of closing schools went. March 15th, you can see that there were 5 states that had closed schools. As of March 20th, there was more. March 25th, there were even more. And at the end of March, only Iowa and Nebraska still had their schools open. This also translates over to colleges and universities. And that has an economic impact. We have one of the largest universities in the world here in Columbus, and it's just shut down. And it won't reopen this year. And now people, horror of horrors, are even talking about college and NFL, National Football League football, not being played this fall. And everybody's trying to get back to work. I know they're trying to do things. So, big problems. I played this last week. I want to re-emphasize it a little bit. Excuse me. I did a guy use these. use these ginger cough drops. And I swallowed the wrong way. And it doesn't work very well. The ginger is quite strong if it hits the wrong spot. But I used this last week. I'll talk a little bit more about this maybe. Everybody's concerned. The mark of the beast. This is the mark of the beast. This is the mark of the beast. I think one of the critical components of the mark of the beast is the beast. And since we don't have the beast, I don't think we have the mark of the beast. I think we have precursors. And everybody's going, oh, the vaccine, they'll put a chip in you. But the scripture says a mark on the right hand or the forehead, not a chip injected into your body somehow. And so people are nervous. I understand that. And I don't know how many things we've identified as the mark, especially in the last 50 years since Hal Lindsey's book came out. But pay attention. I think, these things are important. But again, I think the most important thing about the mark is the worship of the Antichrist. That's what really condemns you. And I played this clip last week, which was put up by Tektronix. And they
social gatherings like spring break beach crowds.
You don't need to put the volume up. They took the virus from just to show how these cell phones could be tracked with the information that they have access to. They went to one beach in Fort Lauderdale, and they tracked, let's see, I think it was 72,000 cell phones as to what happened. And they tracked them all over the country. And within a couple weeks, you can see that, and it shows this is publicly available information. And the New York Times, whether you like it or not, they've done a long series this year called The Privacy Project, because they're concerned about the lack of privacy and what this means and how people are being tracked with cell phones. But so you see from this beach in Fort Lauderdale, and you see where these people with their cell phones went as you zoom out across the country. And eventually you see that within a couple weeks, those cell phones, where they have gone. And they did something with the people leaving New York and leaving New York after the lockdown occurred and going places. So it's a huge problem. Here's this. Pupils may be denied choices. Universities face a 7 billion pound black hole. This again is the UK. Panic and anxiety after education is plunged into limbo. Cash flow crisis threatens charity. So if you're looking for good news, it's that the left-wing seminaries that educate our young people with some very bad, unbiblical thinking are closed down for a while. That's good news. But a lot of these institutions will fail because they run on very, very tight budgets. And it's been interrupted. It's terrible. Now I'm going to show this picture at the risk of being criticized. This is from the New York Post the other day. They're putting bodies in a truck. Terrible toll showing forklifts putting body bags in a refrigerated truck in a Brooklyn hospital. And I see a lot of people say, well, this is just not happening. I will say this. I have a very close friend I've known for decades who sells truck trailers, including reefer units. Those reefers are refrigerated truck trailers. How's business? It's pretty good. Really, what are you selling? Selling reefers. To who? Hospitals. All over. Now, the virus hasn't broken out, hasn't been bad in some places, but you can see Brooklyn hospitals and Queens hospitals that have 8, 10, 12 of these reefer units out there. They're not there to store food when the rest of the hospital is shut down. Crematoria in New York are running 24/7. They actually had to get special order or permission to burn all the time. They're now asking, hey, could you not give us people in wooden caskets, bodies in wooden caskets? How about cardboard? Because we can process more. So when everybody says, well, the regular seasonal flu kills more, and the COVID flu numbers are highly inflated. I always ask the question, well, maybe the seasonal flu numbers are inflated. They just call everything the flu. And maybe they're calling things COVID that aren't really COVID. But I also know that in seasonal flus have been on this earth for 66 years. I do not remember hospitals buying reefer units to store dead bodies in for anything. So you can say that nothing is happening, but there are hundreds and hundreds of videos out there, if you look, of doctors and nurses that they're stressed out. They're at this point of post-traumatic stress syndrome. You need to pray for these people. As I said earlier, they're leaving their families, not seeing them. Doctors are dying, even relatively young doctors. And when there's a video, I think it was at the New York Times this morning, about a doctor who was out. He had the virus, and so he's been out for a month, and now he's back working in the hospital where he got sick, and they were all concerned on that particular floor of this hospital because one of the nurses that was engaged in acute care is now on a ventilator because she has it. So the healthcare workers are at risk, and it's just, it's a very difficult problem. And so if you live in a part of the country where it hasn't broken out yet, count your blessings, but there are places in our country and the world where it has broken out. And the solutions, everybody says, well, we'll just go back to work. We'll just do what China did. Well, I'm going to show you a video of what's going on in Shanghai that's from about 10 days ago. Here's so this may be good news. The Grand Mosque in Mecca is shut down, and the Hajj looks like it's not going to happen. Here were the headlines on Thursday and Friday. This week, 6.6 million people in the United States filed for unemployment. In the last 2 weeks, that totals over 10 million people. This is what you would say unprecedented. Unrivaled job losses. This is Friday, New York Times. Financial Times from Friday. Jobless claims surge in Europe and U.S. as global economy stifles. And I want you to see, well, here's a chart. Now, the Wall Street Journal, which is down here in the lower left-hand corner, they used almost half a page to show they had to use a half a page of the newspaper to show the proper proportion for the rise in unemployment claims. And here you see this on a larger chart. So you see how it's going along from 2019 all the way, you have these jobless claims and that type of thing. And then the spike in the last 2 weeks. Analysts that I saw the other day said that they expect that number to do in the next 2 to 3 weeks to double, triple, or quadruple what we saw in the last 2. This is really, really uncharted territory. 6.6 million file for unemployment. I'll talk a little bit about this. I may not remember it. I think the slide's out of order, but location tracking wristbands required on all incoming travelers to Hong Kong. This is how they're tracking people in China. So everybody wants to say, oh, the mark of the beast, mark of the beast, mark of the beast, ID 2020. Listen, all that tracking stuff is here right now. You saw the video that Tektronix made, just using a couple of examples. They could do that with any place in the world. And it's a problem. And then here's this kind of interesting juxtaposition of this editorial page from Wall Street Journal yesterday. New York is the epicenter of the world. And in many respects it is. It's the financial epicenter. It is commerce. And now it's where the most severe problems with the pandemic are breaking out. But then in the category of never let a crisis go to waste, the article at the bottom is an article by the now very ancient Henry Kissinger, a globalist. And this article is titled, The coronavirus pandemic will forever alter the world order. So whether it was planned or not, the fact of the matter is we are here at a very clear inflection point in the world that I think is related to Bible prophecy. Kissinger said this: "The surreal atmosphere of the COVID-19 pandemic calls to mind how I felt as a young man in the 84th Infantry Division during the Battle of the Bulge." I'm sure my father was in that area at the same time. Now as in late 1944, there's a sense of inchoate danger aimed not at any particular person, but striking randomly and with devastation. But there is an important difference between that faraway time and ours. American endurance was then fortified by an ultimate national purpose. Now in a divided country, efficient and far-sighted government is necessary to overcome obstacles unprecedented in magnitude and global scope. Sustaining the public trust is crucial to solidarity, to the relation of societies with each other, and to international peace and stability. So look, this is what I would expect someone like Henry Kissinger to do, is to, as the title of this update says, never let a crisis go to waste. Look at some of the things he says in the article. The reality is the world will never be the same after the coronavirus. To argue now about the past only makes it harder to do what has to be done. Leaders are dealing with a crisis on a largely national basis, but the virus's society-dissolving effects do not recognize borders. And so I think you're seeing a rise in nationalism somewhat at the initial stages. Eventually, well, if you think the economies collapsed, and you think countries collapsed in the Arab Spring, I think the world is entering a coronavirus winter, if you will, because I think governments will deal with it. Society-dissolving effects. While the assault on human health will hopefully be temporary, the political and economic upheaval it has unleashed could last for generations. If indeed there are generations before the Lord returns and cleans up this mess. The U.S. is obligated to undertake a major effort in 3 domains. First, shore up global resilience to infectious disease. Second, strive to heal the wounds of the world economy. And third, safeguard the principles of the liberal world order. We went on from the Battle of the Bulge, he says in his concluding paragraph, into a world of growing prosperity and enhanced human dignity. Now we live in an epical period. So the Henry Kissinger will be this week's guest prophecy updater. And I don't know where he gets he must have the same cryogenic supplier as Ruth Bader Ginsburg, because I think he's 96 or 97 now. Now we live in an epical period. The historic challenge for leaders is to manage the crisis while building the future. Failure could set the world on fire. Now, whether you agree with his orientation or not, I don't. But he is a very bright person, and he's influential. And he recognizes this as a incredibly epical time, epical period in human history. And so we talk about the tracking. This is an interesting thing. Article that came up. Google is tracking people's movements in their communities. Article put up Friday. And there's Google COVID-19 community mobility reports. See how your community is moving around differently due to COVID-19. This is information that Google is taking from cell phone information and feeding it to the government. Now they say, well, we're protecting everybody's privacy and that sort of thing, to which I would add, so far. Because you'll see a lot of proposals coming, well, we need to track people that have been diagnosed and make sure they're obeying. And just wait till you see this video from China. So here's the United States. So you see here, they can take all the cell phone data and they can say, visits to parks, retail and recreation are down 47%. This is as of March 29th, last Sunday. Grocery and pharmacy down 22%, parks down 19%. Then you can even drill down into like Ohio, down 43%. Grocery and pharmacy, 19%. Parks up 117%. Because people want to get out of the house. They're getting cabin fever. Not only that, you can drill down. We're in Delaware County. Here's the numbers for Delaware County. And you can see here that retail recreation down 59%, grocery and pharmacy down 33%, parks up 171% compared to the baseline. Workplace, compared to the baseline, minus 43%. I went to the office the other day, working the second largest office building in downtown Columbus. We have what I would call a very skeleton staff. Everybody is pretty much working remotely. And one of the people in the office said that the building people tell her, and this is a major bank is headquartered there, lots of big law firms and other businesses, that 80 to 100 people come into that building on an average day now. In the parking garage on 2 floors, I doubt that there were 20 cars. It's a 5 or 6-story parking garage. So it's the zombie apocalypse. Now, one of the things, the reason why this stuff is growing, this tracking capability, Internet of Things, and 2 years ago I was at a technology seminar in San Francisco. Probably my last trip ever to San Francisco. Unless in the Millennial Kingdom I get to do Pebble Beach, but that's a different story. That's my area of responsibility. But you see that in 2020, they said that this Internet of Things, the connected devices that transmit data over the internet, would be 50 billion. That's 2020. In fact, there's slide presentations out there that you can find, and they say, they show that how the demand and supply for these connected things will be. And there's even this thing here, abundance forecasts the need for, among others, 45 trillion sensors. It's incredible growth. In fact, the projection are that the 50 billion in 2020, by 2022 will be 1 trillion interconnected internet devices. By 2040, it'd be 45 trillion. Incredible growth. That's exponential growth. Now I want to play you a video from China. It was put up around March 23rd. It is a British gentleman who is in Shanghai and went to Wuhan. He'll tell a little bit about his story, and his girlfriend or partner, who you'll see walking with him in some of this video, they're into Tai Chi. It's some kind of exercise and philosophy thing. And his partner, wife, or whoever she is a Tai Chi instructor, but she's shut down. So just listen to this and watch what he says about. So this is China, who's supposedly back and everything's great, right? Okay, this is an incredible video.
I left Britain about a month and a half ago to get to Hebei province in China, and at the time I thought this was a really stupid decision. So I did not expect the situation that we're in now, that actually Wuhan is safer than Britain. How has China taken control of this crisis? Well, I've been living in Shanghai with Ming for the last 3 weeks. I want to show you a bit of an insight into life here in China at the moment, and in particular 3 things the Chinese government have done to control the crisis that I think would be pretty hard in Britain. It's not all sunshine and daffodils. I'll talk a bit about the darker side at the end of the video. The Chinese government collect an immense amount of data about their citizens, and they're using it in novel ways to tackle the coronavirus. Every time Wu Ming and I want to leave the apartment complex, she's got to scan her face, and those images, as well as the images from all the CCTV cameras in China, of which there are about 200 million, are fed into a central database and then analysed using machine learning. So it means basically if you're in sight of a camera with about 5 on this crossroads, then it's likely that the Chinese government have analysed your face and know where you are. Another big source of data is the WeChat app. You might have heard of it. So that's WeChat. It's social media and your debit card all rolled into one super app, which is really convenient, but obviously also tracks So the state know where you are, what you've bought, and what you're saying to friends. That's just the status quo, and the Chinese people generally know about this. The images you see are actually from the state media. But they're using this data to try the highest tech epidemic control ever attempted. So if you get ill in China and you go to a hospital, the hospital will register with the authorities, and the authorities will pull your name down from this big database. And they have an algorithm that will be able to tell you all the different places that you've been in the last 14 days and all the people that you might have been in contact with. So the bread that you bought with the WeChat app, the baker now will be notified that they have to self-quarantine for 14 days. And the people that you were next to on the flight, they now have to self-quarantine for the next 14 days. Every single citizen has a code, red, amber or green.
I guess you are yellow.
Why?
Why? Because you come to Shanghai, not have 14 days. I'm a green. Safe.
But if I'm yellow, shouldn't you be yellow?
No, just you are yellow. Maybe next week you are green.
Good.
Some city only green. You can drive car on the road. If you the other colors you can't drive on the road.
Yes. This does seem to be working because you can identify and contain hotspots before they get out of control. And it means that people can continue working if they're not at a risk of contamination, and then self-isolate if they are. We're in Shanghai, which is about 500 kilometers away from Wuhan, and the city's been locked down for months now. I mean, it's beginning to come back to life a bit. Last time I was here, there was basically no one here, so it's good the city is beginning to open up a bit. But generally you're not allowed to eat in the restaurants, you're allowed to buy takeaway, but you're not allowed to sit down and eat. The crisis has been a massive cost to the Chinese economy. They've taken the hit early on and hoping to reopen now most of the country. Every single person that comes into China now has to self-quarantine for 2 weeks. So every day I have to fill in this grid with my temperature. I'm just doing it now. 35.7. I don't know if that's low or not, but it's not a fever. And any flight coming into the country is screened. We've been waiting in Shanghai airport for about 2 hours now. We'll get there eventually. Compare that to Britain, where many flights left Italy, the centre of the European outbreak. On arrival, not even temperatures were taken. Controls were even tighter in Wuhan and Hebei, where you basically weren't allowed to leave the house, and you could only drive with a special permit. It's been the most aggressive disease control attempt ever in history. And it does seem to be working, because if people stay at home, the only people they can infect are their families, and then the transmission of the virus stops. So complete lockdown, tracing those with the virus with big data. And the glue that holds it all together is the intense promotion of social solidarity. The government have framed this as a people's war against the virus. There does seem to be a coming together of China. For example, 20,000 medical workers flew into Wuhan to help with the crisis.
Watch
There's
this.
moving images of the doctors, both male and female, having their hair cut because supposedly there isn't time to shower. These messages of solidarity are all over social media and big adverts like these.
加油中国 We do it.
Overcoming the epidemic requires collective action and personal sacrifice, like not panic buying and staying at home when you're told to. And the Chinese state has tools like these, screens in every public space, as well as controlling social media. And that has meant that the Chinese populace has complied with the requirements to control the virus, and not only complied but feel proud about it, at least on the whole. comparing these bold actions of the Chinese state against Britain's response, which has been wash your hands, it could make Western democracies look impotent, and that's certainly the narrative that the Chinese media are pushing. But as you've probably thought to yourself watching this video, there are downsides to these policies. I'm not going to talk about them. I'm in China to share their ancient philosophy and Tai Chi and all these wonderful things about China. And I don't want to risk anyone around me. But if you want to learn more, I would read Orwell, and I've linked some articles and videos in the description. I'd love to hear your thoughts on what we should and shouldn't take from China's experience. In this time of crisis, where I'm worrying about my loved ones like I imagine you are, I hope that we can get through this, and I hope that we remember our values, the values of freedom and mutual respect. Historically and today, these aren't the norm, and so they're precious. Thanks for watching. I will see you when I see you next. Mask back on.
Very interesting video. And I apologize that it went on for a long time, but I thought that, because there's a lot of questions about why is China doing so well, and China's, boy, everything's not back to normal in China. A tremendous amount of propaganda, and there's a lot of information coming out that China has way understated their problem, particularly in the number of deaths. I saw this morning a report that they had ordered, I think, 200,000 body bags for places in China. I don't think that's for the norm. I don't think body bags is the normal way of disposing of remains there. So it's, and look, this is a very difficult thing. People that here in the US and elsewhere are diagnosed with this are kept in isolation, and the difficult problem is that people are dying alone. It's hard, very, very hard on family members, and then they have a funeral where they can, as Pastor Steve mentioned in the first hour, only have a few people. Sometimes even sons or daughters are excluded because they're beyond the 10 limit. I was talking with a friend today who had lost a son to cancer many years ago, a young son. And I asked him, what would that have been like if you had not been allowed to be with your son? And he was just like, it was devastating as it was. I can't imagine not being able to be with my son as he passed. So incredible things. Other countries are doing things. This is the Stockholm subway. They're kind of doing the herd immunity, but even Stockholm is preparing. And I know these don't have, but they're setting up field hospitals. This is a field hospital in Stockholm. People are doing this. Again, this is the coronavirus, Giulio Miati at the Gatestone Institute. China's great cover-up. I would encourage you to read it. That there's a lot of speculation. Was it intentional, bioweapon, not bioweapon, unintentional, intentional? What are they making use of it? Listen, some parts of me listen that if it was an unintentional release, China's tried to use it to weaken the rest of the world. But it's coming back to hit them, because now that they're trying to get their industry back up and running, there's no place to sell their goods because everybody else is pretty much shut down. And the social restrictions that you see in China are also being done in Japan and Korea, South Korea, and Singapore is increasingly ratcheting down because they're concerned about a second wave, and China is putting some restrictions back. So this is not over. I think it's a real thing, and we can argue about whether the government has overreacted or not, but if you want to believe China's numbers as to what they did well, this is how they did it. There's a video as to how they did it. But doing that has, as you know, we all know, major economic crises. So here's, second part of Never Let a Crisis Go to Waste. This is a report issued by the UN the other day, shared responsibility, global solidarity. You see this term a lot from the globalists, responding to the socioeconomic impacts of COVID-19. They have a map down here, where people are, how the lighter colored areas are set up for people they're better prepared for things. Here's the thing is, of course, what's important to the UN is their 2030 SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. And they say, you know, they have their listed there, and here's how the spoken wheel, the COVID-19 thing, looks how it impacts all of our sustainable development goals, and we got to do something. Implications for the 2030 Agenda and the Paris Agreement. The COVID-19 agreement or 19 crisis is likely to have a profound and negative impact on sustainable development efforts. A prolonged global economic slowdown will adversely impact the implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and the Paris Agreement on Climate Change. And they say political leadership and cooperation to combat COVID-19 at the geopolitical level. The crisis cries out for leadership, solidarity, transparency, trust, and cooperation. This is no time for self-interest, recrimination, censorship, obfuscation, or politicization. Certainly ironic words being used by the UN, which seem to have acted in the opposite way for many of its years. And there's their sustainable development goals. And then here is one of the solutions offered, just a short clip from the Secretary General of the UN, a past guest prophecy updater here, talking about here's how we should approach this. And listen to the numbers that he talks about.
What is needed is a large-scale, coordinated and comprehensive multilateral response amounting to at least 10% of global GDP. Developed countries can do it by themselves, and some are indeed doing so. But we must massively increase the resources available to the developing world by expanding the capacity of the International Monetary Fund, namely through the issuance of special drawing rights, and also of the other international financial institutions to rapidly inject resources in the countries that need them. Coordinated swaps among central banks can bring liquidity to emerging economies.
Well, what he talks about is, notice the 10%, you need to send 10% of global income to the UN. So I guess we're to tithe to our UN masters now. They have set themselves up. It's just interesting that he chose the 10%. And he used the example. The United States, they did a $2 trillion injection, which is 10% of their GDP. So the U.S. is the example for the rest of the world. And maybe some should do more than that. So I talked a little bit about this Wednesday night. And I'm going to do an interview this week on Minute to Midnight. And I'll probably talk more about this. I was going to do more on this today, but I think we'll talk about it tomorrow night. And I think this is an important website. Now, we know that on the crisis, never let a crisis go to waste category, we know that whether they planned it or not, there are globalist people with a globalist agenda that I think sets up the one world system of the end times, or the big system that will try to run everything under the Antichrist. So we see the foundations of that being built. And at the World Economic Forum Strategic Intelligence website, they have this set up, and they have all these different things that people can talk about. Here's the URL for the website. You may have to register to dig too far deep. The COVID-19 stuff is up there. The lower URL is the one that will get you to the COVID-19 thing. Here again, as you see here, you see the COVID-19 financial monetary systems and that sort of thing. And as you drill into this, it has a very interesting, to me, a very intricate design. On the left, you have the spoken wheel. Somebody said, boy, it looks like the all-seeing eye. It also sort of looks like the coronavirus. And as you click on all these little individual links, it will take you deeper and deeper into articles. And it's apparent that they've used some kind of artificial intelligence or something to manage dynamic links. I've clicked on a couple hundred links on the different categories. They have categories for global governance. They have categories for COVID-19, AI, robots, all sorts of things, and then individual country links. And when you click on those squares, you'll end up with a wheel like this. So this one is if you click on COVID-19. Now, I'm trying to figure out, I was surprised when I saw it. I didn't know how long the website had been up. And at first, I thought it was so complete that maybe it was, my initial reaction was, well, I found this on April 1st. Somebody sent me the link. Maybe it's an April Fool's joke but it's very elaborate, very interconnected. It's not like anything that I personally have ever seen. It appears that it went online sometime, and the World Economic Forum has been pushing for globalism and those sort of issues for years, sustainable development. And so, but in December, they put up a video about the strategic intelligence thing, but the COVID-19 thing is pretty new. And when you click on a lot of the links, you'll find that a lot of the recent articles were put up within the last week. And as of April 1st, they were put up very close to that. So I'll talk more about this in the future, but I would encourage you to go to the website. Again, you can probably get to the lower link without registering. It's a free registration, although of course you can pay for more information, but it will give you a very, very good idea as to what's going on. It's, I personally think it's one of the most significant things that I've seen in terms of a roadmap to globalism. Again, they have links to videos, data, articles. It's just, it's kind of mind-blowing. And I've been a subscriber to that website for years. I just had never noticed it till the other day. And again, it appears that it didn't go live in this form until August, and they really started to push it in December. And then with COVID-19, it's sort of exploded on the scene. So we know that they've been pushing this for a long time, but it's just that the COVID-19 crisis is not one that they want to waste in pushing all of these things. And again, they push, vaccines, government response, and then you click on some other links and you end up with global governance, and it's amazing. So let me just make a few more comments about some other interesting things that are going on that I think is a Bible prophecy related. This article in the Remnant newspaper about the Pope. This is Archbishop Vigano. He's not very impressed with the current Pope. The Pope Francis abandoned the title Vicar of Christ. They put out this massive 2,500-page directory each year for the Vatican, and they always have a page on the Pope with a little biography. And in 2019, which is on the left, and then 2020 on the right, so last year's edition looked like this. It had Jorge Mario Bergoglio, the Pope. It had his name in his bio, and above it, it had his titles. The one at the beginning, the Vicar of Christ. That's what one of the Catholic Church has long been. Successor, the apostolic successor, and that sort of thing. But when it comes out this year on the right, Bergoglio is at the top, and the Vicar of Christ thing is put below his biography as a historical title. And Archbishop Bergoglio in his article says, this doesn't seem right to me. I think that, let's see, what does he conclude here? But even if we don't give any credit to this sort of interpretation, the present layout seems to be the fruit of an extraordinary effort at flattery. So, because he's now elevated, at least in this directory, above the title Vicar of Christ. So it's not a support of Roman Catholicism or anything, but it's just a very interesting development that we see. There's also things going on in Iraq and Iran, the tensions between the U.S. there and our response, and reports of some missiles being moved to an island at the Straits of Hormuz, getting prepared to attack things. I don't know exactly what this means. This is an interesting editorial cartoon from the Arab News that shows Ismail Ghani, who's the new head of the Quds Force. I always love these cartoons because of the way you sort of have to dig into them. So he's the new Quds Force commander, replacing Soleimani. But you see down here, Soleimani was known for wearing this big ring. And so the implication is Ghani's a little guy. Ghani can't fill the shoes and the clothes of the guy that he's replacing. It's just an interesting. And so the tensions are ramping up there despite the COVID thing. And then we have continued problems with the unity government in Israel. They're trying to put it together. It's an editorial cartoon from Israel Hayom the other day showing that they're trying to get together even in the midst of a crisis. They had some meetings yesterday, but because the health minister, who's a member of the ultra-Orthodox community in Israel and part of the Netanyahu government, has been diagnosed with the virus, everybody's having to isolate. So they had a meeting to have talks yesterday, and Netanyahu was inside and Gantz was out on the patio because Netanyahu's had to go into isolation again. And there's a number of IDF generals in isolation. We also have problems with our military. You know the story about the captain of the USS Roosevelt aircraft carrier who wrote an open letter saying we need help. We have a couple hundred soldiers with the coronavirus, or sailors, out of 4,500 on the ship. We need to get them isolated. We need to isolate the whole ship. They're docked in Guam. And he was fired by the Secretary of the Navy. Now, everybody's upset and outraged, but I have one question to ask you. Do you know that the USS Roosevelt made port in Vietnam in March? Right next door to Vietnam is China. China was in the midst of a huge outbreak, and I personally think it was highly irresponsible for people in the Navy to make port in a country next to China. If China wanted to disable, let me just ask you this, if China wanted to use prostitutes that are infected with coronavirus to disable one of our major aircraft carriers, it's probably the greatest return on investment in the history of warfare. Infect a few people, send them in when the ship's in port, and now we have one of our major aircraft carriers that's disabled. They never fired a bullet, a bomb, a missile, or a drone shot or anything. I'm not sure that that's what happened. I do know that they made port in Vietnam next door to China in March. I also will note that we have complained much over the years about the gutting of the military leadership under the Barack Obama administration. And I think unfortunately, we're seeing the fruits of that. So I'm going to pray for people in charge that they'll get a handle on these things and act accordingly. Now, I'll finish with this. We know that persecution is coming in the end times. And we have a big problem. There are a host of articles out there, and at the risk of bringing down the wrath of different people for what I might look at, let me suggest an article to you. Look, I personally think this coronavirus thing is a problem, but I'm more than cognizant, believe me, doing work in bankruptcy and lending and workouts and that type of thing. I know what's happening economically, believe me, and I want you to know that I'm sure that the governors in different places are taking into account the calculus of what happens. And as the economic collapse happens, we also know what people do in response to that. They decide that their life is worthless, and that's a tragedy. And so there is this horrible calculus that people now have to make about, do we even try to resuscitate certain people? Do we just say, okay, they're going to die anyway, might as well do it now. But if we shut down the economy, other people will take their life. So it's a very difficult problem. So there are people like Andrew Sullivan. He is a writer for New York Magazine. He writes at The Intelligencer. And he says this is he's homosexual, pray for his salvation. And he just says that as he writes through this article, he goes on to say, this is just a horrible problem, and what's the outcome going to be, and how are people going to make the right decisions? And I think he's giving more thought to it than other people that I see. And this is leading to reaction. For example, this is from the Washington Post this morning. White evangelicals deny the pandemic threat. It's because they love tough guys. And so they use the examples of Rodney Howard Brown, who was arrested, and we can have a discussion about whether that violates the Constitution or not. A lot of constitutional lawyers say it doesn't, but I see a lot. I get people sending me things. If you're not having church, you're a bunch of pansies. You're part of the world system, and you're just following along with the government. And let me tell you, we have decided not to have services here. And if you think that we just sat down and said, well, what did the governor say? What you're saying that we just did it without thinking about it and praying about it and considering all the cost, it's offensive that you would say such things. And I think you need at this time to keep your self-righteous virtue signaling on this issue to yourself. These are very difficult issues. Now, if somebody chooses to meet, that's fine, but there will be consequences to that. And you can cite example after example of people that chose to meet, have choir practice and that type of thing, and now 3, 4, 5, 6 people are dead. So everybody can make their own decisions, but don't bash the other people who wrestled a lot with the decision and continue to wrestle with it as we do on a week-to-week basis. It's a difficult decision. Also, this opinion in the New York Times, the religious right is hostility to science is crippling our coronavirus response. I mean, look, this is what you would expect from the New York Times. This editorial never made it into the paper, but it is on their website. And the person says, listen, well, all these people around, they deny climate change and they don't believe in evolution, so how can they believe in any kind of science? And it's an old canard, but more and more people, I'm just telling you to be prepared that more and more people are going to say this, and I believe it will lead to some persecution. And de Blasio wants to shut down people that violate his order on meeting, maybe even permanently, and he refuses to back off on it. Now, I don't think a judge would ever let him do that, but we're in a very difficult situation. The answers are not black and white at this time. If you treat them as black and white, you have to understand that there are very stark consequences going the other way. But listen to what Catherine Stewart says. Donald Trump rose to power with the determined assistance of a movement that denies science, bashes government, and prioritizes loyalty over professional expertise. In the current crisis, we are all reaping what the movement has sown. The denial of science and critical thinking among religious ultra-conservatives now haunts the American response to the coronavirus crisis. And then cites some of the Rodney Howard Brown and some other pastors who have insisted on having large meetings, and that led to the arrest of Rodney Howard Brown also. Jerry Falwell is also mentioned because he's reopened at least part of the Liberty University campus. It's a very risky move, if it doesn't work out. That place, I don't know. I disagree with the move, I'll just say that. I think it's unwise at this time. Let's let this thing play out for a little bit, and we understand the economic consequences, believe me. I have clients who are struggling with whether they will survive. It's a problem unlike I've ever seen. It also translates over, this is an article coming out in the Jerusalem Report by my friend Brian Schauger. I talked to him a little bit this morning. COVID-19 and the Jews, today's Black Plague, and now there are claims by people like Rick Wiles and everything that, this is he called it the APAC virus for a while, and some pretty vile things. It's also interesting, the convergence, and I'll close with this. A week or so ago, the health minister, who's now been diagnosed as positive for the coronavirus in Israel, ultra-Orthodox Jew, said that, are you worried? What do you think? And he said, well, we hope that Mosque will be here by Passover. Now, this is a very interesting thing. We know that there's a false Messiah that comes first. And I think it behooves us as a church to warn people of that, even our Jewish friends, because it will have very severe consequences, eternal consequences. So I'm going to play you a clip of, I don't even know his name, I saw this the other day, talking about, because here we are at Passover, and there's articles in the Jerusalem Post and elsewhere that are talking about, they're titled, A Passover Like No Other. That for the first time since the first Passover, we've had to go inside our homes and shut the door. It's a very interesting spiritual time. And we want people to awaken to the truth of the gospel in Jesus Christ, the true Messiah, and not to the false one. And that's a difficult thing to navigate. But I think as we get into this time, we're going to have to be more cognizant of what we have to do. But listen to this video. This is an Orthodox rabbi. I don't think he's ultra-Orthodox. I would put him in the sort of the settlement category rabbi. But listen to what he has to say.
Rabbi say, I'm going to share something. I don't get much out of davening at the Kosel. It's too many people. I know you may be surprised to hear this. I'm not a people person. It's too many people. It's outdoors. It's a balagan. I don't always yearn to be there, to be in the Beis Hamikdash. But today I do. What's happened over the last 2 weeks? I can't go to Eretz Yisrael. I can't go even if Mashiach comes. I don't know what I'll do because of my business. What business? If we have a business, it's because we can do it from anywhere in the world. I can't go because I'm so connected to my community and my shul. What shul? I can't step foot in my shul right now. But I have to be near my yeshiva. My yeshiva is now accessible from anywhere in the world. I can't leave because I need to be near my family. Even if I'm here, I can't be near my family. I miss my grandchildren so much. I'm not able to be with them and hug them. There are no more excuses. We've spent 2 weeks inside. And what's grown within us over the last 2 weeks is that we want to be together with other Jews. We want to be worshiping together with other Jews. We want to be able to take a plane to Eretz Yisrael, and even though it's so much easier now to go to Eretz Yisrael in our day than it ever was before, this is the first time in so long that a Jew absolutely can't get to Eretz Yisrael. The Seder is a yearly reminder that we need to want it. It needs to build up within us. The Kos of Eliyahu is there because Eliyahu is going to give us a day. He's going to give us a period. He's going to give us a time where we truly yearn for the Mashiach. We truly yearn to follow him. I believe in so many ways that Eliyahu is here. Eliyahu has made us want Mashiach. 2 weeks ago, if the news said that Mashiach had come, our first reaction would be, how am I going to move everything? And how am I going to disrupt my whole life to go? Our lives have been disrupted. If Mashiach came tomorrow, we would run out of our homes so fast and follow him to Eretz Yisrael. One of the things we'll be asked when we get to Shemayim is Tzipisa Yeshua. with a strange question. Did you want to go? Did you yearn for the times of Mashiach? Why do I have to yearn for it? I just need to go when the time comes. Because if I don't yearn for it, I'll miss the moment. If I don't hold on to these feelings, whether Mashiach comes now or it comes later in our lifetimes, if we don't hold on to these feelings, then he'll come and we won't be ready. Rabbosai, Eliyahu doesn't knock on the door. He doesn't ring the doorbell. We have to open the door for him. These last 2 weeks has opened up our hearts to Eliyahu and his message, to want more badly than we've ever wanted, to go together to Eretz Yisrael, to daven together in the Beis HaMikdash. May we see it soon in our days.
Now, we can talk about
Mashiach came tomorrow. We would run out of our homes so fast and follow him to Eretz Yisrael.
So do you see it's very difficult to comment on. So pray for the peace of Jerusalem. Pray for the fulfillment of Romans chapter 11, and then all Israel will be saved. Pray that we will boldly proclaim to everyone in the world who Mashiach really is. And pray that we would desire the true Mashiach to come as much as people who do not yet know him do. Lord, thanks for your word. We pray that you will use us to share the gospel to the Jew first, and also to the rest of the world at this time. In Jesus' name, amen.